20 to 25 at the Lincoln, and a good 30 inbound at the George Washington Bridge. In Queens, the inbound LIE is slow from the Grand Central in through Queens Boulevard. The Grand Central sluggish Francis Lewis in through 188, and then pretty much from LaGuardia right into the BQE. Northbound Cross Island still heavy and slow from Northern Boulevard right on up into Bell Boulevard. Channel tells us the New York State Thruway has a mile delay coming down to the Tappan Zee. Inbound at the Midtown Tunnel, you're looking at about a 5 to 10 minute delay. 59th Street Bridge up.
Describe New York in one word.
Describe New York. Well, if I should describe New York, I'd say one word. Exciting! Outrageous. New York City. We have good things, we have bad things.
One word. One word.
One word.
One word. Fabulous.
Intense.
Confusion.
New York is crazy. I'm telling you, it is crazy. I love it here.
It's the best.
How do you describe New York? It's been serenaded in song, portrayed in print and on canvas, captured on celluloid, and imprinted in the mind of anyone who's ever visited or dreamt of visiting the Big Apple.
New York is a city like no other, a city of contrasts, of superlatives, the world center for business, finance, and the creative arts. International Video Network welcomes you on this video visit to New York City.
Deep down under everything, people are really good in New York, no matter how cold everyone says we are.
New Yorkers are a breed apart. They have a reputation for speaking loudly and being very self-assured. As the song says, if I can make it here, I'll make it anywhere. A New Yorker's behavior should not necessarily be taken for rudeness. It's merely the result of living in a city where conditions are crowded, fast-paced, and tumultuous, where you have to speak loudly to be heard and walk briskly to get through the crowded streets.
It's not the calm life. It's 90 miles an hour zone, you know? And you want to relax sometimes. It's not a relaxing place.
New York is one of the world's largest cities, but even more, it's been called a state of mind. To those who live here, New York is the center of the universe. To the rest of the world, it's a small plot of land on the eastern coast of the United States, almost halfway between Boston and Washington, D.C. New York City is comprised of 5 boroughs, covering about 300 square miles with more than 7 million residents. In area, the biggest borough is Queens, home to John F. Kennedy and LaGuardia airports, as well as the high-flying New York Mets at Shea Stadium.
The northernmost borough is the Bronx, famous for its zoo, as well as for that other great baseball team, the New York Yankees.
Brooklyn is the most heavily populated borough, with more than 2.25 million people. If independent, it would be the 4th largest city in the United States.
Staten Island, the 4th borough, is more rural than the other boroughs. It's best known for its ferry ride, a 5-mile trip to Manhattan that still costs a quarter, but is worth much more.
But the borough that means New York to the rest of the world is Manhattan. While the 5 boroughs together comprise New York City, it's the island of Manhattan that we'll explore.
It's a small island, little more than 13 miles long and 2 miles wide at its widest point. But it holds a preeminent place in the world of art, finance, business, media, architecture, fashion, design, and culinary arts. What we now call New York City was inhabited by the Indians in 1609, when Henry Hudson, sailing for the Dutch East India Company, first navigated the river that now bears his name.
The first Dutch settlers arrived in 1624 and established a settlement and trading post called New Amsterdam. In 1626, for the equivalent of $24 in goods, Peter Minuit bought Manhattan Island from the Indians in the name of the Dutch West India Company. More than 100 years later, New York became the capital of New York State and the original capital of the United States of America. It was here in 1789 that George Washington took his first oath of office as president.
Of course, the New York State Capitol was moved to Albany and the U.S. Capitol to Washington, D.C. But the stature of New York as a city continued to grow. From the mid-19th century through the early part of the 20th century, New York City welcomed immigrants by the thousands. After processing at Ellis Island, they entered New York society, changing it irrevocably as they created new lives for themselves and their descendants.
To the Italians, Russians, Irish, Jews, Germans, Hispanics, Greeks, blacks, Chinese, and others, New York promised hope for a new and better life in a free society. Many came to escape persecution. Most traded old problems for new ones. All left their imprint on the fabric of New York culture and society.
For many of the immigrants, their first glimpse of this new world was the Statue of Liberty, standing boldly in New York Harbor, a welcome symbol of freedom. Sculpted by Frederic Auguste Bartholdi, the statue was a gift from the people of France to those of the United States in honor of their enduring friendship. Bartholdi had several ideas for the monument he was commissioned to design, but it wasn't until he sailed into New York Harbor that the ultimate vision came to him. He called it a mighty woman with a torch, lighting the way to freedom.
She was a generous gift and a noble vision, but public apathy almost prevented her arrival. A pedestal for the statue was to be built from private donations in the United States, but the money barely trickled in. It wasn't until newspaper publisher Joseph Pulitzer launched a national campaign that money poured in from all parts of the country, and the pedestal was built. On October 28, 1886, the Statue of Liberty, enlightening the world, was dedicated by President Grover Cleveland. 100 years later, to commemorate her centennial, the statue was restored and rededicated by the grateful people of the United States.
Today, most visitors reach the city via one of its 3 major airports. But New York remains a very busy port, second in the world only to Rotterdam, the Netherlands. Roughly every 28 minutes, an ocean-going vessel enters or leaves the port with cargo, passengers, or both.
Manhattan is bordered on the west side by the Hudson River and on the east by the East River. The great avenues traverse the city from north to south and, for the most part, are numbered consecutively. Cross streets are usually numbered consecutively too, with the lower numbers being downtown. And the city is unofficially divided into neighborhoods and districts.
New York's climate can best be described as temperate. Winter lows average in the 30s, summer highs in the 80s. With a generally pleasant climate and the surprising compactness of Manhattan Island, New York is best seen on foot. But when the weather just won't cooperate, pedestrians can take to a transportation system that includes almost 12,000 taxis, 1,000 miles of bus routes, and more than 200 miles of subway lines. The traffic in New York is legendary, but what you might not realize is this congestion has been around as long as the automobile. The New Yorker's nightmare is gridlock, a situation that occurs when traffic congestion blocks travel in all directions at an intersection. It's merely another fact of life to be reckoned with in this metropolis.
About New York?
I like freedom and wealthy.
As a commercial and financial center, New York is second to none. American and foreign banks are highly visible on Park, Madison, and Fifth Avenues, and other large thoroughfares. But the street most associated with high finance is Wall Street. At one end of the street, dwarfed by the surrounding buildings, is Trinity Church, once the tallest building in New York. An Episcopal church dating back to 1697, its quiet cemetery is an island of serenity amid the hustle and bustle of the financial district. Robert Fulton, inventor of the steamboat, and Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton are among the notables buried here.
Visitors to the financial district will enjoy a look at the New York Stock Exchange. At the front entrance, a tree commemorates the sycamore at the corner of Wall and William Streets, where 24 brokers met in 1792 to create the forerunner of the New York Stock Exchange. Today, more than 1,000 members trade shares in a daily frenzy far removed from the gentlemanly handshakes or taps on the shoulder that sealed a bargain 200 years ago.
Farther uptown, the area between Broadway and 9th Avenue, south of 40th Street, is known as the Garment District. Within these few blocks, also referred to generically as 7th Avenue, 1/5 of the clothing manufactured in the United States is made. A representative from the clothing manufacturer, Paris Blues, explains why New York is so important to the industry.
New York is definitely the fashion capital. It has an international flavor with not only tourism, but people are able to travel there to all the different fashion capitals of the world. So the fashion influences come from Europe or the Orient or so many different places to New York first because of its manufacturing and credibility in the marketplace. And there is a lot of production directly in the fashion area in New York. A lot of production happens right in that area. And so when you're walking up and down 7th Avenue, you see people rolling racks of clothes back and forth and salesmen's sample lines going in and out of all the different buildings. But they're actually producing and they actually ship out of that area as well. And once a month, all the buyers from all over the country come into New York and see all the different manufacturers. If you're not there, it's really like not considered a serious company to do business with.
Many immigrants made their fortunes in this industry, affectionately called the rag trade.
Just a few blocks away on 47th Street, messengers deliver even more precious goods. Here, in small briefcases or even in their coat pockets, diamond merchants carry their wares, sometimes making exchanges right on the street. About 80% of the country's wholesale diamond trade is conducted within this block.
New York City is a shopper's paradise. More than 30 department stores, including the famed Macy's, carry an assortment of items from all over the world.
First opened in 1858 in a mere 20-foot wide store, Macy's today covers more than 30 acres. Its large roof now encompasses a post office, a flower market, a pet shop, a butcher, baker, pharmacy, 3 beauty salons, 5 restaurants, and its own police force. Shoppers can roam from the cellar with its arcade of exotic foods to the upper floors with their boutiques complete with convenient cafes. What other store houses its own recording studio, rare coin collection, and exotic toyland? There are many department stores, but there's only one Macy's.
As the undisputed media capital of the United States, New York is home base for some of the country's most prestigious publishing houses, newspapers, radio, and television networks. At the NBC studios in Rockefeller Center, visitors can tour the darkened sets of popular news programs.
In any television production, there are basically 3 major areas: lights, sound, and picture. Before we get into it,
They also learn about the complexities of television production through demonstration and a bit of participation.
New York is huge. It's bigger than life.
At the turn of the century, as the need for space increased far beyond its availability, the city began to grow in a new direction. Straight up. The construction of the Flatiron Building in 1902 marked the introduction of the city's architectural trademark, the skyscraper. Its 20 stories were quickly dwarfed by the 60-story Woolworth Building, and then the 71-story Chrysler Building. In 1931, the 102-story Empire State Building took the premier position among the city's towering giants.
Named for New York, the Empire State, the building took less than 2 years to complete. It's said that work progressed at such a hectic pace that at times the building rose more than 1 floor a day. The top floor was meant to be a mooring platform for dirigibles, but that plan was abandoned after a near disaster. The building has had its troubles with aircraft.
The Empire State Building, like all New York, was hidden by fog as a Mitchell bomber trying to reach Newark Airport crashed into the tallest structure in the world. 13 died, including the crew members, 2 Army men and a Navy hitchhiker. What happened will never be known, while the flyers in the crash are all dead, and eyewitness accounts vary. One thing is certain, the pilot was off the radio beam. The 79th floor was hardest hit by the crash. Some people thought it was a balloon bomb. Firemen had to drag their hoses 11 stories to reach the flames on the 79th floor, as many elevators were knocked out of order.
Although the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center reached 110 stories in 1972, the Empire State Building still holds a powerful position as a symbol of New York's greatness.
The great hotels of New York are also landmarks, whose elegant walls hold revealing stories of their celebrated guests. The New York Penta, once the fabled Hotel Pennsylvania, has hosted every president of the United States since 1919. The hotel's public relations director recalls one illustrious visitor.
Well, I remember a visit from President Johnson many years ago. He's very fond of cookies, and he would always ask for a particular kind of chocolate-dipped cookie that he enjoyed to be sent up to the apartment. And on this one occasion, he was going out to lunch to speak in the ballroom downstairs, and as he was leaving, he took a fistful of cookies and put them into his pocket. And from behind him, you could hear a voice saying, "Lyndon, you put those back." And it was Lady Bird Johnson reminding him that he was on a diet.
What's it like for a hotel when a president visits?
It's like any other guest, really. You want to make them as comfortable as possible and provide for their comforts and needs. The presidential suite at the New York Penta Hotel consists of 5 rooms, including 3 bedrooms, a very large living room, and a separate dining room.
Just like any other guest.
Being an island, Manhattan is linked to its neighboring communities through a number of tunnels and bridges, the latter being no less an architectural wonder than the city's most interesting buildings. The first bridge linking Manhattan to Brooklyn was the Brooklyn Bridge. Completed in 1883, the bridge was, for 20 years, the longest suspension bridge in the world. One of the few bridges to have a pedestrian walkway, the Brooklyn Bridge provides one of the most glorious walks in the city. The view of the bridge and the city at night is especially breathtaking.
Today, the longest suspension bridge in the world is the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, linking Brooklyn and Staten Island. This magnificent structure, completed in 1964, was named for the Italian navigator who discovered the harbor while searching for a passage to Asia. This elegant bridge is a fitting memorial to his exploration.
In the city, the buildings that house great art are often viewed as art themselves. The Guggenheim Museum, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, remains one of the architect's most controversial works and is called by some the corkscrew or the mushroom. But the grande dame of New York's many museums is the Metropolitan Museum of Art, or simply the Met. Its extensive collections cover the broadest range of periods, styles, and artistic media. From the Egyptian wing with its famed Temple of Dendur to its powerful collection of primitive art spanning 3,000 years. From the great classical masters to the vibrant impressionists to the provocative modernists, just to name a handful of the treasures housed within these walls. The Metropolitan is, without a doubt, one of the world's great museums. Scores of other museums and galleries make New York the art center not only of this country, but of the world.
Performers, there is no audience as tough as a New York audience, and no success as great as a triumph here. In fact, the now popular name, the Big Apple, was originally bestowed in the 20s and 30s by jazz musicians who coined the term as a way of saying they'd made it to the big time. Theatergoers can choose from productions at the 40 or so theaters located in the theater district around Broadway and 45th Street. While prices for productions in these houses have become quite high, savvy theatergoers often wait in line the day of the show to purchase half-price tickets at the Tickets booth in Times Square. The lines may be long and the choices limited, but the reduced price is usually worth any inconvenience. Few experiences are more exciting than the crush of people, taxis, and limousines arriving at a theater just minutes before curtain time.
Less expensive are the productions at more than 350 off-Broadway and off-Broadway theaters. Scattered throughout the city, some productions, like The Fantastics, become as famous as their Broadway counterparts.
Longer lived than any show, and another symbol of New York's theater society is Sardi's Restaurant, a traditional gathering place for actors, writers, and producers. Sardi's is most well known for its caricatures of famous performers spanning several decades. The president of the restaurant explains the tradition.
There was a young Russian immigrant named Alex Gard who suggested that he do caricatures of the stars for meals at the time. And from what I understand, Sardi was not that keen on it, but a few of the major stars on Broadway at that time, I believe Norma Shearer was one of the first, liked the idea. They were good customers, and he put them on the wall. Of course, with caricatures, you have a problem. You know, they tend to exaggerate the prominent features of actors, and actors being a little on the vain side didn't always object to them. We insist that all our characters be signed by the actor. And goes on, you know, before it goes on the wall. And we've had a few instances where we've had to ask them to be done again. I have more hair than that. My nose isn't that big.
Broadway lore and legend permeate the restaurant. For example, have you ever wondered about the origin of the show business term turkey?
And turkey was an expression that referred to a show that would be put up just before Thanksgiving and run through Christmas, because there were so many people in town viewing so many shows, and they would put up this anything between Thanksgiving and New Year's. It's still sort of that way, and people would go see it, and that's where the expression turkey came from. Because they would always appear around Thanksgiving, these particular shows, and sure enough, they would last right up until New Year's, and then they would disappear forever.
But there is much more to the performing arts than just theater. New York is home to some of the world's greatest orchestras, opera companies, and dance troupes. The famed Lincoln Center at the intersection of Broadway and Columbus Avenue is home to the New York Philharmonic, the New York City Ballet, the New York City Opera, and the Metropolitan Opera, not to mention distinguished touring companies from all over the world. What performer hasn't dreamt of playing Carnegie Hall? And since opening night, the 6,000-seat Radio City Music Hall remains the largest and possibly the best-known indoor theater in America. In truth, all of New York is a theater, every street corner a stage.
The enthusiasm of the New York sports fan is legendary, and the city's sporting events give them plenty to cheer about. The New York metropolitan area is home to some of the country's biggest professional franchises. There is a sport for every season and every sensibility in the Big Apple.
Well, me, what I like of New York. I like the streets, the people, the music, the trees, and the restaurants.
For many New Yorkers, dining out is a major pastime, and in this area too, New York is unequaled. When money is no object, there are restaurants such as the Four Seasons, L'Hôtesse, and 21, whose names are synonymous with fine cuisine. For a quick bite on a more economical budget, street vendors are always available to dispense hot dogs, knishes, pizza, and hot pretzels. The immigrants who populated New York are also feeding it, and the epicure will delight in the abundance of restaurants featuring cuisine from all corners of the world. According to the New York Restaurant Association, there are approximately 25,000 restaurants in the city.
New York is a city that never sleeps.
Central Park, 840 acres of parkland in the middle of the city, is a quiet haven in the midst of all the hustle and bustle. You can still ride in a horse-drawn carriage through the park and hear your driver describe what life was like here in more sedate times.
There's a lot of history, you know, each place in the park has its own, history to it. The original carousel was there, built back in 1871. It was pulled around by two blind mules that were underneath it, and unfortunately that burnt down. But this down there's an old dairy. Well, that was built back in the turn of the century. That's the oldest standing building in the park. People use it to get married in the summer, they rent it out. People have parties in there. My most favorite part of the park is up at the Bethesda Fountain. It's the most beautiful part.
Central Park has 2 zoos, skating rinks, tennis courts, and other recreational facilities that are enjoyed all year round. In the summer, concerts and plays are also performed here.
Since 1822, the Fulton Fish Market has operated from a site just south of the Brooklyn Bridge. The city's premier fish market is still a hub of activity in the early hours of the morning. But now the area attracts visitors all day long as they flock to the shops, restaurants, and attractions of the South Street Seaport. The Seaport is a restoration project that includes a museum, an audio-visual presentation, and an exhibit of historic vessels.
Also on the East River, between 42nd and 48th Streets, is the majestic United Nations complex. A guided tour is the best way to see all of the public rooms, and visitors are welcome to attend most official meetings. Translators on the scene provide simultaneous translations of all speeches and discussion in the UN's 6 official languages. For more than 40 years, world leaders have stood at the podium of the UN's General Assembly, broadcasting their viewpoints to the world.
New York's ethnic neighborhoods, though in close proximity to each other, still manage to retain their own customs, personality, and charms.
This is a wonderful city. How you like Mulberry Street?
Here in Little Italy, restaurants, coffee shops, clam bars, and pizza parlors fill the air with fragrant and spicy aromas.
Just south of Little Italy, the colorful streets of Chinatown are home to a Chinese community of more than 100,000, but are explored by thousands more visitors attracted by the shops and restaurants offering exotic herbs, vegetables, condiments and ducks, or jade and ivory, and other treasures imported from the Orient.
Check
While the rest of the city is closed up on Sunday, the Lower East Side comes alive. It's a big shopping day here, and bargains are to be found if you know how to negotiate. The stalls on Orchard and Grand Streets are filled with all sorts of items that are sold uptown in fancier stores for much more money.
What do you get here that you can't buy in Bloomingdale's? Bargains. Bargains galore. Everything is cheaper than Bloomingdale's down here. We have all the new products in all of the old world flavor. If you know your product and you know what the retail price value is, you can get a bargain down here. Of course, you might have to fight a little bit for it, but that's the flavor of it. It's something that you really can't imagine. You have to experience. It's something like you could never imagine if you've never been in a big city like this before.
The Bohemians and Beatniks may be gone, but Greenwich Village remains a unique neighborhood. Just north of Little Italy, many of the streets in the village are quaint and tree-shaded, with charming clusters of row houses and brownstones. The village has always attracted writers and philosophers who fill Washington Square. The square was once a common burial ground for victims of the plague, and a place for public executions in the 1700s. Later, it became a drill ground for the militia. Today, it is a meeting place for musicians, chess players, skateboarders, and students from nearby New York University.
Greenwich Village retains much charm and has many historical connections. Tucked away on Bedford Street is New York's narrowest house, only 9 feet wide. It was occupied at different times by poet Edna St. Vincent Millay and actor John Barrymore.
To many, Greenwich Village is synonymous with folk music. In the 50s and 60s, small, dark coffee houses and music clubs filled each night with folk singers and their appreciative audiences. The village nurtured most of that generation's greatest talents.
You name them. Everyone from Bill Cosby in comedy to people like Eric Anderson, Simon and Garfunkel, Bob Dylan was right across the street sleeping behind a stove many years ago. And that's where he got started. That was the old Gaslight. There were many places on this street back in the 50s and 60s, and those kind of places created an atmosphere that was very creative, and the people played all those places. They were basket houses mostly. That's where you did 20 minutes and passed the hat afterwards. What we have here tonight is the open mic, and they can come here and at least, what I call, have a place to be bad. They need a place to get that experience, to get themselves up in front of an audience and actually do it, to get rid of the wobbly knees and the bad chords, and that doesn't work and this does.
It's time you're out of luck. Go home to Daddy's bucks. Here's a little tax deduction. Sad baby pop, that's too bad. Now I got a new girl. I've got a new girl. She's nice and she's new, and she's gotten me over you. All right.
Since the early 70s, artists and writers have been moving into the Soho district, so named because it's south of Houston Street. The design style high-tech came to life here when imaginative decorators took large, dark industrial lofts and turned them into light, airy living spaces. Today, the area is filled with galleries, boutiques, and of course, restaurants.
And how does the upper crust live? Some of New York's most elegant addresses can be found on Park Avenue, Sutton Place, and Central Park East and West, where doormen and limousines are the norm.
So how do you describe New York?
It's light and color, sun and shadow,
Streets yellow with cabs, or thick with events.
seasons of spectacle, and tributes to reason.
It's surprisingly familiar, and sometimes surprising. Often fun, and occasionally frustrating.
The city is majestic in scope, electrifying in detail.
It's bears, and it's butterflies.
Culture,
Cuisine,
confusion.
and quiet.
It's America's heritage.
All cultures as one.
It's illusion,
Reality
celebration,
and love.
movement,
Aromas
ambition.
and history.
New York City is a part of each of us.
But most important, New York is a city of people intensely proud to be called New Yorkers.
You allow yourself to be who you want to be in New York, and no one can change that.
That's right.
Because that's who you are. You are one of a kind here.
Perfect.
Everybody is different.
And how does a New Yorker describe New York?
In a nutshell, describe New York, it's home.